Welcome to Conversations. Today we are going to talk about the split in the West, the growing divide between the United States and Europe in the context of the new national security strategy that the Trump administration has advanced. We will also talk about it as how they are diverging, especially on the Ukraine issue. And then we will also look at the overall broad ramifications of the terrorist attack in Sydney on Bondi Beach. So today we have with us a very distinguished diplomat who has served India's interests for 40 years as a very eloquent articulator and defender of India's national interests. We have with us Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad Sahab. Welcome to Conversations, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor. Good to be here.
So I want to begin by basically telling the audience that the US government, the presidents are required by law to publish a national security strategy at the beginning of their term. Theoretically, they should be doing this periodically, but usually they do it only in the first term. It has to come out in the first 3 months. The Trump administration took about 10 months to come out with theirs. And it has befuddled, to be very, I'm being very lenient with my own country's president, that it was befuddling the language, the way they have articulated America's national interest. It is a significant departure from how traditionally the American strategic community thinks about US role in the world and US national security interests. But I also noticed that there is a huge gap between what they claim to be their strategy and what they have been doing for the past 10, 12 months. So we will talk about that. So welcome to Conversations, sir. And I want to listen to your first take on the national security strategy of the Trump administration.
Professor, the document as it stands is clearly an embarrassment. It is devoid of any serious thought. It is tom-toeing the achievements, non-existent achievements of the incumbent in the White House. But we as students of international relations need to go over it very carefully in order to bring out some elements of quote-unquote thought that might have animated the writers of this document. And there are some points that come out quite clearly. The first point I would mention here is that there is a revised Monroe Doctrine, much more proactive, much more aggressive, much more interventionist. The signal has been given from Washington that the entire territory of the Americas, right from Canada up to Tierra del Fuego, now is an integral part of the United States empire, and that no one else will be allowed this. The approach is extremely interventionist because they are looking at specific governments that should rule the various capitals. They want far-right governments everywhere, and they're effectively blackmailing the electorate, conveying that if you don't elect the person we choose, then we will deny you assistance, we will deny you aid, we will deny you economic cooperation. Simultaneously, they are showing to the Latin American people what could actually happen to them if they don't go along with the American diktat, and that is now on show with regard to Venezuela. I cannot recall any scenario in recent years where an individual country took it upon itself to kill large numbers of people whose names are not known, who happened to be sitting in some wretched sailboat and were caught on the waters of the Caribbean and were put to death. Now, this is horrendous. If there is a crime that somebody needs to be indicted, this is that crime. So I would say to you that there is a very important signal being given by the White House with regard to the Americas. The problem, they don't say much about Canada, but I would imagine that at some stage even Canada is part of this rubric. But Latin America certainly is, and they are looking at Latin America as a source for resources for American interests and all, but it is entirely US centric. There is hardly any mention here of what how the entire region could develop. There's no positive message over here. For the rest, the document is extremely feeble and lacks clarity. There are some cliches used with regard to West Asia and the Arab world, the Persian Gulf, etc. But the other significant part with regard to the NSS is the abuse of Europe. There is a kind of, I mean, Donald Trump has made it very clear that he has supreme contempt for Europe as it stands today. What he is looking for is a Europe that systematically places in its capitals far right governments. So again, you have a domestic political agenda being projected right across, and that any attempt by existing governments to restrict the activities of these extremist elements is regarded as an intervention in their freedom of speech and expression. It's a travesty. But otherwise, just to speak about civilizational erasure, projecting onto Europe America's far right agenda relating to migration, all of these are very troubling developments, and therefore we do not know where it leaves Europe. The first feedback coming from European capitals is absolute panic and paralysis. Because nothing has prepared them for this kind of systematic and sustained abuse and direct intervention in their domestic political order.
One of the interesting things is that they are actually calling it the Monroe Doctrine with a Trump twist for his Latin America. I don't know whether you have ever listened to Professor John Mearsheimer, but Professor Mearsheimer is an advocate of a grand strategy which is called offshore balancing. So what offshore balancing says is that you divide the world into certain spheres. So there are 6 or 7 spheres at which they look, which is one is the Western Hemisphere, one is Europe and Eurasia, the other is East Asia, and then there is West Asia and Africa. So basically what Mearsheimer recommends is that America fully establishes hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, completely dominates its own region. And rather than dominating other regions, the US acts in such a way that it prevents the emergence of a hegemon in those regions. So avoid anybody else from getting hegemony in those regions. So prevent China from dominating East Asia, prevent Russia from dominating Europe, prevent Iran from dominating the Middle East. So this is the minimalist budget-based approach to foreign policy, which is, and I think it looks like that is what Trump wants to do. He wants to have complete sovereignty over the Western Hemisphere, decide who rules in Western Hemisphere, and China doesn't begin to dominate it, or the immigrant flows also he wants to control in the Western Hemisphere. But in the Middle East, even though he says that we are going to have minimalist interests, he seems to be, a lot of people still think that the foreign policy is Israel first rather than America first. But the language that they have used for Europe is stunning, to say the least. We want to preserve the civilizational, prevent the civilizational erasure of Europe. So they're saying America's mother of American civilization, whatever it may be, is Europe to a great extent. And they are saying that Europe is losing its civilization and America is now going to protect that as an American national security. So what do you see? How do you see this sudden concern for civilization, civilizational identity? Is this going to become a major problem for the rest of the world?
I respect Mr. Mearsheimer, and he has had extraordinarily good insights, and he has been consistently a harsh critic of successive American policies.
Yes.
He is basically making a plea for much reduced American interventionism, particularly through military. You are aware that his criticism started all the way from Afghanistan and went into Iraq, where you saw massive use of force, killing of hundreds of thousands of people. But at the end of the day, from both countries, the Americans had to pack up and run, devastated the country, harmed the region, gave rise to numerous elements which are of an extremist character, but got nothing in return for their effort, lost a lot of money, but it didn't seem to matter because they weren't losing that many American soldiers, but they were killing a lot of people. Left behind a lot of ill will, devastated societies, etc. I am also very worried about the Monroe Doctrine and large with that Donald Trump twist. What have the Americans really done for the Americas, particularly Latin America, over the 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine? The Latin America is a shambles. It has not reached its full potential. It has been harmed successively over several decades by potentates imposed upon the region by the United States. It is a poverty stricken area. It has got very fragile state systems. It has very creative writers and poets and artists, and we admire that. But those are the cry of anger and grief. It's not rather than a celebration. And therefore, I am particularly worried that what we are looking at is a 21st century version of the rank exploitation, intervention, violence, and intimidation that the Americans have exercised in that region for so long. Coming to the other parts of the world, you know that the NSS is a has very limited value. It comes and it goes. It is a kind of a period where people like you and me spend
Oh,
some time over it, write learned articles, and after a few months, nobody even remembers it, least of all the authors who put it down. The United States is, I think, overloaded with national security strategies that are not worth the paper they are written on. They just reveal to you some of your worst fears with regard to the denizen in the White House. That's all. And if I had any concern about the state of affairs in the United States, I'm even more concerned now. Coming to the Middle East or West Asia, there is no doubt whatsoever that the United States remains totally committed to Israeli interests, exemplified by Netanyahu. That means you're looking at a far right agenda, which is completely in accord with what Donald Trump wants. He is supporting the rise of the far right. There is going to be, however, a problem. And the problem is this: the far right in the West has a very long tradition, a 200-year-old tradition of anti Semitism. So you have, on the one hand, a president for domestic constituency reasons supportive of Israel, but increasingly elements from within his rank and file, including people who have access to him and have dined at his table, are using language which is openly and crudely anti Semitic. Therefore, you are going to have a very extreme situation that over a period of time, you will find the discourse relating to support for Israel becoming more feeble and MAGA increasingly articulating anti Semitic language and possibly seeking anti Semitic policies from their great leader. And this is worrying for Israel. This should be seriously worrying for Israel. Turn to Europe. Yes, we know over the last 2 or 3 years, Netanyahu has made a major effort to build ties with the extreme right in Europe. But the extreme right in Europe has even a deeper tradition of anti Semitism. A very, very
mhm.
dangerous bunch of people, not known for depth and gravitas. If these are the people being pandered to, that I would be very, very worried if I was sitting in Tel Aviv today.
One of the things that you pointed out is very astonishing. For example, in the last few months, two of the stalwarts of the MAGA movement, Tucker Carlson and the congresswoman from Georgia, Margaret Taylor Greene, these two have become the biggest critiques of Israel. And the kind of issues that they are raising are definitely going to hurt whatever control Israel has had on American policies. And so in the end, it is just going to be uh, money that will speak for a while, because what the MAGA crowd is doing is essentially shattering whatever cultural support Israel might have had on the right by saying that, look, our 1,000 pastors went to Israel, but nobody talked about the plight of Christians who have suffered under Israel. All they talk about is Israel. But do you agree with the assessment of the Trump administration or their fear? You know, especially if you remember J.D. Vance's speech at Munich. Some of them are really idiotic, talking about absence of freedom of speech in Europe, because the US is also curtailing freedom of speech here in the US. But this argument that the mass migration is going to eliminate, the national security strategy actually says in 20 years, many European countries will not be European, implying that they will be either brown or...
Starting with London.
Yeah. So do you see that happening, and is that a bad thing?
See, if you look back, as the Cold War ended, you had of course, you had the Fukuyama-Huntington divide, where you had the end of history on the one hand, and you had the clash of civilizations on the other. At the heart of the second was the writings of Bernard Lewis, who demonized Islam and showed that Islam, the faith and its people, billion-strong people, are going to be the enemies of Western stroke American civilization. And Huntington picked up on that, elaborated it in his book. And therefore, you have sustained from that period till today Islamophobia becoming central to European and Western discourse. This is the key here, that in the case of Europe, this migration having become such an important issue is linked with Islamophobia, because many of the migrants are not only non-white, but many of them happen to be Muslim as well, whether they come from West Asia, South Asia, or Africa. So there is a combination of race and Islamophobia that is shaping the core of the far right agenda. In the American belief is that Europeans have been much more accommodative of this kind of migration than they ought to have been. And this American hostility is working, because more and more mainstream parties are shifting to the hard right. And you know the articles that have come out with regard to the German Chancellor Merz. You have seen the writings relating to Starmer in the United Kingdom. These mainstream parties are crudely and across the board supporting the xenophobia and racism that which they have borrowed from the far right for electoral purposes. The reform of Farage in London and the AfD in Germany. And you can't recognize these parties at all. Look at the extreme hostility that they espouse. They use Muslim ministers to abuse the Muslims, and they think that that gives them greater credibility. Honestly, it does not. I want to go back a little bit. I want to point out to you what many of us seem to be forgetting. In the 19th century, anti-Semitism included Arabs and Jews.
Yes.
Right? When you said that someone was anti-Semitic, the language used at that time, the racist language, encompassed both Jews and Arabs. It's only in the late 20th century that, as a result of influence of Israel and their support bases in the United States, that they were able to separate the Jews from the Arabs and slowly accommodate Jews within a broad so-called Judeo-Christian civilization, and also indicate to a certain extent that Jews are an integral part of the West and that they are white. Therefore, the Muslim has been now nudged out of this in this scenario and has become the object of sustained hostility and abuse. And therefore, when you use anti-Semitism it has now become a weapon in the hands of Netanyahu and indeed his support bases in different countries. He is able to wield this weapon against anyone who dares to criticize Israel and his policies. And very often his finger is pointing at Muslims and particularly Arabs, but certainly Muslims as well.
Well, there's a perception here, and because I have not seen that particular report that I'm referring to, I want the listeners to be guarded, but there is an argument that Israel did some kind of analysis in the United States to find how to recover its image post Gaza. The image has been destroyed, especially among the Democrats and among young Americans. The Israel's image is completely shattered. So they wanted to know what can they do to restore Israel's image. And the answer apparently that has come out is that no, it can't be repaired, but the only alternative is to ratchet up Islamophobia. So while people are obsessed and busy focusing on Muslims, and if you notice, there is an attack in Bondi, there's an attack in Washington D.C. on our national guards. So if we remain focused on Islamophobia, then the atrocities of Gaza will be forgotten. That seems to be the strategy. So you are right. Not only has anti-Semitism been split, one is the governments do their best to fight one form of hate while actually directly and indirectly encouraging another form of hate. So they fight Islam.
I would like to elaborate on this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, 1 second. But what I wanted to say was that the problem for the Western governments who are trying to suppress anti-Semitism but allow Islamophobia is it is the same people who practice both, and that is their problem. Yes.
I wanted to recall to you, I was in Riyadh at the time when we had the events of 9/11. At that time, as the World Trade Center buildings started falling, in Israel, led by Sharon, there was genuine concern that the Americans would blame Israel for what had happened because of the atrocities of the Intifada. And Sharon gave an interview, which I have quoted in my book, West Asia at War, where he said, and I quote, "They will blame us for what has happened." They means the Americans. They will blame us for what has happened. What does this have to do with us? This is the problem of extremist Islam. We should convey this message very clearly. This is Sharon's statement. I then analyzed American writings over the next month. A narrative was then built up, led in from the front by New York Times and Washington Post. The narrative was this, that there is something inherently wrong with Islam, the faith, and Muslims, the people. And that, number two, they scapegoated Saudi Arabia because you needed not just you didn't need an abstract concept. You needed to then focus it on a specific country, Saudi Arabia. And I analyzed several hundred articles that appeared in the United States in that 1 month. The narrative that has then, from that day till today, become fixed in the minds of all people in the United States and in the West is that there is something inherently wrong with Islam. And that is how you cultivate Islamophobia. Now, and that remains. It has not changed. Every time where things are done to Muslims in terms of which, in response to which there is a retaliation, that issue is never discussed. The mass atrocities that were carried out by the American forces all through the 1990s, first in Iraq, the mass. Do you remember the Turkey shoot of the returning
Yes.
Iraqi soldiers? They were taken out and killed. Thousands of them were killed from the air when they posed no threat to anybody. And then the dual containment and all of that. And mostly they have forgotten, and this is something which they need to be reminded. Al-Qaeda did not emerge from Islam. It did not. It emerged as a direct result of policy decisions taken by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan as part of the Cold War confrontation against Soviet Union. At that time in the 1970s, Islam was not the enemy of the West. It was seen as a natural partner of the West because it was opposed to godless communism. Most of this, the problem with the American public is that their memories are erased systematically and alternative narratives are given. I fully agree with you that post the following the events at Gaza, firstly, there is a very severe restriction on free discussion, very severe restriction on free discussion relating to the war and Israeli atrocities. Minute you mention that in many countries, you could even be arrested, and you
Yeah.
certainly are not allowed in the public space. Very rarely are people able to speak in detail about what has happened. And I have been recently interviewed by various people, including from the including from Europe, where I gave certain views relating to a Bondi Beach attack. And I was told, and I asked, what do you think? And they said, we agree with you, but we are not allowed to say this in public. And the threat is that they'll take away your job. So
Jobs,
there is no
funding.
free
Yeah.
discussion on Gaza. Secondly, you already have a very solid base of Islamophobia right across the United States. It's very easy to hate these people as aliens. They are not white and they are Muslim. You delve into a deep-seated ancient heritage. The irony here is that the Christian animosity for Jews is much longer and deeper and much more virulent than it has ever been against Muslims. But the Jews have now been accommodated as part of broad Western civilization, and it is the Muslims who are the enemy. I would fully agree with you that the Israelis would make every effort, whether successful or not, they will make every effort to ensure that the focus from Gaza is shifted away, and more you then revive the old Islamophobia that had animated much of the West after the 9/11 attack.
This is where the national security strategy comes in. I mean, this whole focus on the civilizational threat to Europe, it is an veiled assault on Muslim migrants, clearly because the Muslim population in Europe is increasing, Muslim influence is increasing. The fact that cities like London and New York are now governed by Muslim migrants is generating a civilizational fear, which can be devastating. One interesting, I think, one interesting, shall we say, collateral damage of this civilizational Islamophobia is going to be Indians. People don't seem to realize. I think of Islamophobia and xenophobia and hatred like poison gas. Once it enters your house, it's not going to pick and choose victims. Everybody from your parrot to your uncle is going to die from that poisoned air. And so this Islamophobia, xenophobia, this will not protect Jews. It will also increase anti-Semitism. But as you can see with the fortunes of what is happening to Vivek Ramaswamy in the United States, the amount of hate he's getting from his own party, which is absolutely stunning. And the man can't get it. He's such a brilliant chap, but he doesn't understand that he's not white and it is not religious. He's trying his best to wrap himself with Ronald Reagan's quotes. And he's trying to say an American is this who believes in these values of the neocons. It's not happening. It's the same with J.D. Vance,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
So do you
yeah.
think that some of this is also going to hurt Indians? Because India is now the biggest exporter of human beings. I mean, India's biggest export is people. And we have sent close to 1 crore
Let
people
me
just to get
clarify
that.
first, if
Yes.
you agree. There was a liberal West.
Yeah.
They used to argue liberal values, and liberal values meant accommodating people of different races, religions, genders, all kinds of people. There was a liberal order, and they used to see this as the strength of the West. The soft power of the West was this liberal order, and they distinguished it from authoritarian regimes that were non accommodative. Recall here, though it's a stretch now, United Kingdom espoused multiculturalism and France espoused laicite. Both of them led to the same result. They were different practices, but they led to the same result, that faith will not, in France, faith will not be allowed in the public space. And it doesn't matter who you are a French person, right? That was France. In the United Kingdom, they followed multiculturalism. They said everyone can follow what they wish. In the public space, there will be dignity and respect for you. When you see the far right has challenged, is challenging not just race, is not just racist and xenophobic, it is actually an assault on the core values of the Enlightenment, which is what shaped the West. Otherwise, what else was special about the West? The civilizing mission, the white man's burden, these were all supposed to be products of enlightenment which distinguished this unique civilizational space from all the rest, including from Russia. And now you find that if you have taken this away, you are as authoritarian as anyone else. You will not find any difference as you become less tolerant, you become more abusive, you start abusing human rights, and all of this. In the right wing is a violator of the core values of the West. Now, you talk specifically about India. Uh, Up to now, we have rejoiced in the fact that our people are, regardless of their faith, our people are well educated, extremely they are talented. They have met the needs of the West, particularly of the United States, when they were required. Recall here, as a resident in the United States, from the 50s and 60s, the Americans desperately needed doctors. Indian doctors used to pick up their MD degree and then they would rush to the United States the next day. Today, I think they constitute a very significant presence in the American medical scenario. Then, when I was posted in New York from the 80s onwards, the demand was for computer scientists and rocket scientists. And again, Indians provided a very large number of this kind of scholarship and this kind of achievement. Now it is technology, information technology initially, now artificial intelligence, and all the variations thereof. Again, you find Indians. So there has been a certain degree of complacency in India that we are naturally in demand in the United States. But two or three things have gone wrong. Number one is a very large number of people who are not that well qualified have misused the system, the American system, corrupted the American system from within, and have come into the United States in huge numbers. The Americans were willing to accommodate you so long as you were adding value to their country. But now you are getting a large number of people who violated the visa. That is number one. You also find a large number of people who have entered the United Kingdom, entered the United States and other places illegally as part of human trafficking. Some of them have very falsely declared that they are that their human rights are likely to be abused, and you find sections of people from different parts of India claiming asylum in the United States. All of this is bogus. You are absolutely right to suggest that that's not Islamophobia, it's the racism, the xenophobia and the racism generated by populist politics, which is sweeping Western democracies. Populism is going to be the driving force, and that kind of racism and xenophobia does not care whether you have a PhD degree or not. You and I know, I have lived in the United States, that large number of prosperous people who were doctors and holding very senior positions were mugged on the streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan and put to death by people. It didn't matter to anyone that this guy has contributed to the country. He's just a non-white character, and that's what's going to happen. I fully agree that yes, the West Europe as well as the United States is no longer the comfort zone for our people to migrate. Increasingly, we will need to look at opportunities at home or in other parts of Asia and Africa.
But you do see the rise of right-wing populism outside the West also. In other parts of Asia, in India, in Pakistan, when Imran Khan was in power, he was a right-wing populist, and so are others in Asia too. But uh, given all of these changes that we are seeing, cultural changes, fundamental shifts in the way the Americans are thinking, when Joe Biden became president, I had made some predictions uh, when he was being sworn in, which is published in a website called the Conversation. It is about academics writing in popular places. And my suggestions were that Donald Trump's policies that were implemented, especially with the Middle East, are not going to be repealed by Joe Biden. He's going to keep most of them. And so, except rejoining the Paris Accords and on Ukraine, Biden was pretty consistent with Trump's policies in the Middle East, keeping the capital in Tel Aviv, not restoring JCPOA. So basically, he did exactly what Trump did. So what the problem with this right-wing populism is, once they move the barometer to the right, even if people from center left are elected, they're not able to bring it back. They are winning because they are changing. So people like Starmer were able to come back not because they moved the country to the center, because they moved to the right. So they were able to come to power. So the benchmarks that Donald Trump is setting, or whether it is with regards to minorities, whether it's regards to immigration, whether it is regards to the role of the US in world politics, I think you will see that being mimicked even in the global South. Leaders in the global South are also going to adopt the same language and use it in their own domestic politics, in their own foreign policy. Do you see that as a possibility?
Absolutely. We have to accept the fact that there was a certain democratic order drawing on the values of enlightenment. It was in Asia and Africa, it was post-colonial. As far as the West was concerned, it was part of their civilizational continuum, that they are enlightenment. And many other parts of Europe, which had not been blessed with enlightenment, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, were also anxious to accommodate many of these things. In the case of India, we are a unique example in Asia where all the enlightenment values were enshrined in our constitution by people who were purely Indian. Many of them had studied abroad, doesn't matter. The point is, the Congress Party, the broad church movement, uh, provided the people of India with a consensual document. From the extreme right to the extreme left, it was adopted and accepted. So you have that. Now, why has the core issue, which is now being examined by several scholars in the several scholars in Europe. Some of the most outstanding writings are coming from there. Sadly, not as robustly examined in Asia, in India, as it ought to be. But looking at the writings there, there is no, there has to be an explanation as to why in democratic countries with a long history of freedom and democracy, populism is becoming so influential. In several cases, it forms the government. In several other cases, it influences the government from outside. And the reason is, I think, that there has been a fundamental change in the ability of state order to fulfill the minimum aspirations of their people. All the achievements of modern times are based on professional achievement and ability to master the technological prospects that are put before us. Those who are qualified enough for this are part of the success narrative. Overwhelmingly, I would say 80 to 90% of people in a state order do not have these qualifications and are excluded. These are the people, the excluded, the marginalized. These are the ones that populist leaders are tapping into and trying to basically tell them that the success of the elite is founded on corruption and pandering to minorities and black people and women, gender issues, and you, the hardworking, mainstream, white people, you have been deliberately denied. Nobody tells them that you never finished school. Nobody tells them that you are a neo-literate, you are a neo-illiterate. And that this brown guy whom you hate has a PhD in frontier areas. That is never discussed. It is you are the victim. So now when you have that all across Europe, as technology, firstly industry and later technology, in its economic and commercial application, she was shifted by Western capital to non-white countries, non-Western countries, because they gave you comparative advantage. Many of the traditional people lost their jobs and are no longer able to sustain themselves with the dignity they had. Therefore, everyone else is scapegoated. Therefore, you have to see now that populism will not go away because the aspirations of your people have not been addressed. Nobody is ever admitting to us that we have failed you, we have not provided you with the education you deserve, the food that you deserve, the living quarters you deserve. We don't give you medical attention of the kind you need in the United States. And therefore, rather than do all this, you say you white people are the victims because all benefits have gone to non-white people and to women who have destroyed traditional family homes, etc. This is the kind of nonsense that is in the case of Europe. They have got this again, this business of racism on the one hand, and they have got faith as a factor on the other. In the case of India, again, unfulfilled aspirations. They are now, you have a scapegoat. You can pick up anybody you wish. It can be the Muslims. It can be lower caste people. It can even be women who are in the working space. All kinds. You can scapegoat anybody so long as you are able to blame someone else and pick up and pick up a parliamentary majority in a certain election. This is now become an end in itself. It will take time for populism to be exposed in terms of its delusions and its inadequacies. But unless you have a robust counter movement, it's not easy. You see, because in democratic politics, we lurch from election to election. We don't have time for long term thinking or the panacea that many of these serious issues deserve. We don't even have a proper analysis of many of these. In India, we are fed on delusion. Overwhelmingly, I said in an interview recently that we are the number one in rhetoric and delusion and the lowest in terms of actual performance. And this is true. But you're not supposed to say it, and you get abused because you said something that was so truthful.
You know, one of the few examples where we have seen right-wing populism being challenged is by left-wing populism. So, for example, in the United States, we have people like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, and now Mamdani, who is being quite inspirational for a lot of young people who are running for office. So unfortunately, it is another similar kind of movement, if there is any. But as yet, there is no counter movement to populism. So in the end, I want to turn towards what happened in Australia, the terrorist attack, which killed 16 Jews who were celebrating Hanukkah, and I think about 40 were injured. And unfortunately, one of the two turned out to be from my hometown in Hyderabad, and Sajid Akram, and his son Naveed Akram, who is an Australian, who was born in Australia, brought up and educated in Australian schools. If any society deserves to be blamed for it, should be the Australian society, because he is the product of their society, and so is in many ways is his father, who left when he was in his 20s, he was just 50 when he was killed. So he must have been around 24, 25 when he left India in 1998. But what do you see the impact of that particularly devastating attack is going to do on Australia, and as a result of that, on some of the Western countries? Because even Starmer, as a reaction to what happened in Bondi Beach, started putting more restrictions on public meetings and protests in UK. What do you think are going to be the, like, I see nothing positive coming out of that, but what do you think is going to be the consequence of what is happening there?
I can see, as had happened after 9/11, I can see narratives being developed. Narratives being developed in terms of focusing on Muslim radicalization. Nobody, I have not seen a substantial article or news report that says, why are these two men angry? Exactly the same thing happened in 9/11. Because you scapegoat the faith and its people, it protects you from having to analyze what has actually happened in terms of the political background. What had happened in 9/11 was of course, there was a rise of radical Islam fomented by the Americans as part of their Cold War. Everyone was fully familiar with what was happening, but you turned a blind eye. I would also recall to you that in the 1980s, Abdullah Azzam, the leader of the jihadi movement, was a welcome visitor in the United States and visited several cities in the United States. And he was, Ronald Reagan said that he was like, he reminded him of the Pilgrim Fathers because they were so much, they had
Hmm.
larger principles and values. So all of that was erased when the United States was attacked. Though the run up to this, the anger of people was already there. The anger was about Israel. It has always been about Israel. And the United States, lopsided policies towards Israel, consistently supporting it. And as Israel has moved to the right wing, more and more its demands have become maximalist. The United States has been a consistent and willing supporter. No one, Sharon understood this. Sharon was genuinely worried that the Americans would say that, look, you remember the second Intifada,
Yeah, I do.
the breaking of bones, that young children, young boys and girls were thoroughly thrashed. Are we forgetting how many hundreds of thousands of people have been in prison? More than half the Palestinian population has experienced Israeli prison, overwhelmingly women and children. That was the case in 9/11. And I had argued at that time and I told people, many of the iconic photographs of that period are available to you. You remember that boy Muhammad who was
Yes,
shot,
12
deliberately
times.
targeted. All of these may
12
be
times.
ignored by Western media
Yeah, yeah.
under Israeli influence or any other right wing influence, but it is seared in the eyes and memories of local people. Just because you don't want or you pretend you can't see it, it doesn't mean it disappears. I am saying this to you with all the authority at my command. Don't think that you can carry out a mass murder at Gaza, kill 70,000 people, the majority of them women and children, get away with total immunity, then you deny them food. You use starvation as a weapon. And despite that so called peace process and the ceasefire, 400 people have been killed after the ceasefire. Don't believe that there will be no consequences. I'm saying this with sorrow and with deep anguish. There will be consequences. People will be angry, and it has nothing to do with Islam or radicalization. But people are angry with the total freedom that the Israelis have enjoyed. I don't like the fact that certain people of a certain community are attacked. But I'm trying, my duty as a scholar is to explain to you why these things happen. And I'm going to say this to you that there will be more and more. Unless the West and the United States, particularly, finally restrains the butcher in Tel Aviv, finally encourages the Israelis to look at the Palestinians, finally pursues a two-state solution that gives these people dignity and does not allow any more this kind of massive mass murder and annihilation. By the way, this mass murder of 2 years, there has been a continuous process of mass killing, not
Yeah,
on that scale, from 2006 in Gaza.
yeah.
And look at what has been happening in the West Bank. And do you still believe in the United States and in Europe that we can go back to business as usual? You are delusional, and you are completely deluded if you believe that is the case. That is the explanation for Bondi Beach. I hate to say it, it pains me to say it, but the anger is very substantial. It has nothing to do with the radicalization or going to the Philippines, picking up this or that. There is a deep seated anger, and that is because the West has separated itself from its own values, has become hard right wing, and totally accommodates the mass murder and the genocide of the Israeli people.
But sir, look at what happened in the last 2 days, for example. I mean, there are things that are happening which sends the message that we can go back to as if nothing has happened with regards to Israel. For example, Egypt has now signed a $35 billion oil supply deal with Israel. The Qataris have decided not to invite Turkey to the post, whatever, they want to establish a stabilization force in Gaza. And with the talk of more and more countries like Kazakhstan joining the Abrahamic Accords, it seems that Muslim governments seem to want to go back to pre-October 7th relations. In fact, more, I mean, towards the establishment of Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. So if Israel can dominate the Middle East, why can't it hope to dominate Western societies? I mean, why should, do you see what
I
I
want
mean?
to, you have a phase in world history. There was a time when the Jews were grossly mistreated by the same West that
Yeah,
is today demonizing Muslims. And you know the pogrom, the ghetto, the massacres were all fine tuned and made an integral part of Western culture. It was all that time the Jews were grossly mistreated and denied basic rights, even by during the period of enlightenment. So there is now a phase in history when sections of the Jews have emerged, but the anger that they should feel against their Christian and European tormentors is being now fully expressed against their own Arab brethren, who are also children of Abraham, according to the Old Testament that we believe in. You find that the Europeans are today blackmailed into ensuring that they extend total support to Israel, and they are much too weak and much too cowardly to deny this support for them. So you find Israel now using overtly the horrors of genocide, of the Holocaust, in order to ensure that the West does not at all point a finger at them. Hence, these fake narratives are being cultivated systematically and projected systematically. All populist leaders and all, even other democratically elected leaders, are too cowardly, too terrified in terms of their re election to speak the truth. Because the minute they speak the truth, they fear that they will lose their job. And therefore, we will go through this period. Now, you mentioned the West Asian leader. On many of my programs with you, I have repeatedly mentioned there is a deep and unfathomable divide between the interests of the rulers in West Asia and the interests of their own people. Their own people's heart beats very powerfully for Palestine. The ruler's heart beats very powerfully for their survival and their own interests.
it's true.
At the moment, they believe that their interests are served over the short term in this confusing diplomatic and political churn and military churn. It is served by pandering to the denizen of the White House, and go and buy a little more time. If from the Gulf, they have promised him several $1 billion of contract,
Yeah.
and they have made given him the pomp and pageantry that he loves. Most of them are very seriously insecure in terms of their future, and they believe that this is not the right time. But I'm not sure that this is sustainable. I am going to strike a note of caution here. This policy, even for rulers, is not sustainable. And I believe that what we are looking at is possibly a short term, knee jerk reaction in a very confusing scenario where Israel actually attacked Doha and conveyed to all the potentates in the Gulf that any one of them could be a target. So they have done certain things. Qatar has done a defense agreement with the Americans. Saudi Arabia has reached out to Pakistan. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has gone to Washington and has had a nice visit with Donald Trump. As of now, these are short term measures. They will be, they are all of them. Every capital in West Asia and beyond is thinking how to prepare for that scenario, the post American scenario. The sense in all these capitals is that the United States is in terminal decline, and that the antics of Donald Trump in the White House are exemplify this kind of decline. None of us would have ever believed that we would witness what we are witnessing, the abuse of American presidents in the White House Hall of Fame, the kind of document, the national
Sure.
security strategy that has been, it is a pain to the person, the individual who is totally obsessed with his own persona. This is a low. This is a real low. People across the world, but particularly in the global south, including in West Asia and beyond, are preparing for a post US hegemony world order. And we are all part of that. We are applying our mind to it. We are thinking new thoughts of the kind we had not thought before. Not necessarily any of them has found space in the public domain. We have a long way to go, but none of us believe that the Western hegemony that has in place effectively for 200 years and possibly culturally and in terms of colonial authority, maybe a little longer, 300 years, those days are gone. And I personally envisage serious and important development taking place across Asia where ancient empires, civilizational spaces connected with China, India, Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia will now reassert themselves and seek their rightful place in the world order.
On that interesting observation, we would like to end today's discussion. Ambassador Saab, as always, you have been very profound in your observations and candid in your discussions, and I found it very fascinating that you were able to basically unwrap the global developments like an onion. So thank you very much for coming to Khanversations and being so honest and so clear thinking. It was genuinely a delight listening to you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let's keep in touch. So much is happening around us, and it is our duty to your viewers to discuss these issues openly and contribute to their understanding of their own universe, which is in such a mess.